Hello and welcome to Bupsa's Dharma Lounge, a time and a place to relax and to discuss all things Dharma. In this episode, I offer a reminiscence of Zen Master Samu Sunim, who passed away this past August 6th, 2022. Hello and welcome. I'm Bupsa Frank Jude, and I'm back. Had some major technical difficulties, but thanks to the support of some of our listeners, particularly Gabion Sally Weber, Ilchu Andre Talbot, Hyokan Tatiana Staloff, Kenkyo Dana Erickson, I was able to invest in a new laptop. Still could use some more money if anybody would like to share some Dana with me, but they did offer enough to make it feasible for me to get a new laptop and thus bring Bupsa's Dharma Lounge back to podcasting. Again, I want to thank you all for comments and emails that I do receive. Please feel free to comment on the YouTube channel, give reviews, thumbs up, whatever reviews in Apple, wherever the podcast is found, and share it with those that you think might be interested. All right, so in this episode, as I said in the intro, I would like to talk a little bit about the Venerable Samu Sunim, who is a Korean Zen master who passed away earlier in August 6th. I was introduced to my teacher before I ever met him. It's a very interesting story, I think. I took a retreat with Sunim in Chicago in 2000. And at that time, I chose to take precepts from him and to train with him through a training matrix that he created called the Maitreya Seminary Program. And that eventually led to my ordination as a Dharma teacher, Bupsa, on July 4th, 2007 in Toronto. But I was studying with him for a whole year before I realized that I actually had met him at least 5 or 6 years earlier when I heard him teach at a Change Your Mind Day, which had been hosted by Tricycle Journal in Central Park, New York City. I can't remember if it was 96 or 97. And as soon as I made the connection, I knew that indeed this was my teacher, because I had really connected with his teaching, with his humor and accessibility that I had seen exhibited at that Change Your Mind Day. Samu Sunim was born in Korea in 1941, and he was orphaned during the Korean War. He entered a Buddhist monastery following a period of several years of homelessness, and he studied there as a novice monk, and then undertook and completed his Zen training under Master Solbang Sunim at Pomosa Monastery in Busan, Korea. Despite the fact that he was a monk, he was conscripted into active military service, and so he left his native country, first for Japan and then finally the West. Originally settling in New York City in 1967, where he founded the Zen Lotus Society, which is now known as the Buddhist Society for Compassionate Wisdom. He then moved to Toronto in 1971 and completed a 3-year solitary retreat before he began his teaching career there. At that time, he reactivated the Zen Lotus Society from a basement apartment where he was living in Toronto, and mainly served the Korean Canadian community and gave meditation instruction during the week. Over the years, Sunim was truly an engaged Buddhist, and he and the Zen Lotus Society provided meditation training. He held Buddhist art and photography exhibitions. He hosted visiting Buddhist teachers. He organized public events and many benefits for the poor, as well as for peace vigils. In 1985, he established a Dharma student training program because he felt it very important that there be Western-born teachers teaching Zen in the West. And that Dharma student training program became the Maitreya Buddhist Seminary, in order to provide a consistent study practice program for serious students wishing to train as priests or teachers. This is a really unique innovation of Sunim's. Most times, and to this day, in most Zen communities, someone becomes authorized or ordained as a Zen teacher after maybe years of apprenticeship, living near or around a Zen master. But there's a huge level of subjectivity and politics that are involved often. And Sunim created this program with a very defined curriculum. It's like, these are the texts we study. These are the practices that we do. These are the rituals and ceremonies that we learn, the chants that we memorize. And it's supposedly a 3-year seminary program, but as far as I know, only one person that I know actually completed it in 3 years. It took me 7. And I know that some people it's taken 10 or more years. So there is it's not subjective, but there's an individual basis. I mean, we proceed through these 3, quote, years, and at the completion of it, and there is an academic element too, we write papers every year and all. If you do the work, you complete the assignments, you learn, you get ordained. And there's 2 tracks. You can become a priest or a lay teacher like me, kind of like a minister, called the Bupsa, which means Dharma teacher. Sunim was known to be a bit of a disciplinarian. He could be a pretty tough guy. He had a real strict eye for detail, right? And he would hold high expectations for his students. I remember one time being on retreat, and I was assigned the role of the evening bell. And there's a formal ritual around it with a gata that is chanted, and the bell is sounded several different distinct places. And I felt kind of honored to be given this. And so I did it on the first night. And then the next morning, he assigned it to my Dharma brother, Muhan. So generally, if you get assigned a role during a retreat, you do it for the week. So that was the only feedback I got, right, by him giving it to someone else, that I hadn't done it, quote, right. And so I really paid attention to what Muhan did. And there's no one thing that I could point to. I just kind of really looked at him and how it was done. And sure enough, the 3rd morning of the retreat, Sunim goes, Bupsa, you do the evening bell. And I did it, and nothing was said, but I continued for the rest of the retreat. That's how I knew I had learned what I was supposed to learn. But it's not anything I could really put into words. And that's a very Zen kind of thing, I think. But there's no more specific way that I can explain it, right? But he saw some detail, and I picked up something, and that was transmitted. Now, this is also coupled with a deep understanding of Western ways and mores, right? Even though he was Asian born, he had a real deep understanding of Western psychology, right? And that coupled with a very frank, straightforward manner. He was very funny. He was always ready to smile. He had a real can-do attitude, like he would make things work. And he also had a very compassionate heart. And this was all combined with tireless enthusiasm and a determination for seemingly impossible tasks. He served as Zen master of the Society's 5 temples in Toronto, Ann Arbor, Chicago, Mexico City, and New York City until around the summer or so of 2019, when he formally gave it over and retired. In the last years, he had developed Parkinson's, and he split time living between the Springwind Farm and the Toronto Temple, where he passed, as I said, on August 6th, in the loving presence of his disciples. To me, it was primarily his accessibility that drew me to him, and a really humble way that he interacted with us that earned my respect and my appreciation. Even when I thought maybe he was a little overly tough and, I might get a little angry, I knew in my heart that everything he did was at least with the intention of strengthening my practice. Like, he really helped me to do that. He never exhibited any airs of superiority. I remember one time I was working with him cleaning up the temple, and he was mopping the foyer. And a visitor to the Toronto Temple came in asking questions about the Sunday public services and what time they were and how long they ran and all that. And Sunim just gave him, all the details necessary. That Sunday, I can still remember the the expression on the visitor's face when he comes in and finds that the guy he was talking to, who he thought was the custodian, was actually the teacher, sitting now in formal robes up at the front of the Sonbong, the meditation center hall, sitting in front of the altar. I want to share just two personal stories that there was so many interactions with him that I learned much from, but two very distinct ones that I think give you a little insight into how Sunim taught and how he was. I had spent about 11, 12 years studying in the lineage of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Community of Mindfulness, New York Metro. And so all of a sudden I was thrown from that kind of cultural environment to this one that was a bit more ascetic, which is very typical of the Korean Zen tradition, and also very earthy. I sometimes joke that if you could imagine Zen arising in southern Italy, you would get a little sense of the earthiness, the passion, very different from the Japanese, for instance, that that you might be familiar with, which is most, familiar in the West. And so the retreat was much more onerous than anything I had ever experienced with Thich Nhat Hanh. And my head was filled with thoughts like, it doesn't have to be like this. This is not the way we used to do it, in blah, blah, blah. And like, just absolute, I was really in hell. I was having a hellish experience. And on the third day, I think it was, I went in for my interview, and Sunim is like yelling, like, who are you? And just kind of like, before I could answer, he would be like, saying something else. And then he rings the bell, which basically signals the end of the interview. I barely got anything out. So just before I bowed to sit up and leave, he leans forward and he puts his hand on my knee and he goes, how are you doing? I was like this ogre. And now all of a sudden it's like, how are you doing? And I look at him and I was like, fuck it, And I just say, I haven't taken a shit in 3 days. And he looks at me and he goes, sometimes constipation can be psychological. And then he rings the bell again, which is like, all right, now for sure the interview's over. So I bow and I get up, I walk out, and I'm thinking, oh God, of course. I kind of know this. I do know this. On the way to the Sonbong, I go into the restroom, I take a dump and go back, sit down, and have one of the deepest, most just amazing, like just beautiful experience of sitting, just ease. And the rest of the retreat was fine, Then another thing that really struck me is I didn't do much chanting in the time with Thich Nhat Hanh. We did some, but not a lot. And in my Zen training with Sunim, we had to learn like a 350 syllable Dharani. We learned several other chants, and there's a unique chant called Yabel. And unlike most Zen chants that you might be familiar with, again, especially if you're more familiar with the Japanese, usually very monotone, like the Bodhisattva, like that kind of a thing. Yabel has a melody. And it was definitely the first chant that I found myself really connecting with. And I was trying, like in one of my meetings with Sunim, to explain it, and I was like grappling for ways to explain this experience. And he just very silently said, "It's emotionally satisfying." And like my head just expanded, because I realized at that point, him saying that kind of pulled the rug out from under me, because I was thinking I had to find some Zen explanation for my experience. And I was like, it's just good enough that it's emotionally satisfying. Why not? Why can't that be a good enough reason? And I have to say, like, from that moment on, Zen training just became practice. There was nothing special. And that's what made it special. It was an amazing experience to spend the time that I got to spend in Toronto with him. And yeah, so that's Samu Sunim. So if you'd like to learn more about him and the community that he founded, I'll in the episode description, I'll have the website for the Zen Buddhist temples. If you're in any of the areas near any of those 5 temples, I would highly recommend you check them out. And if you've never exposed yourself to Korean Zen, which is Son, I think you'll be really surprised to see how different it is from Japanese Zen. It's really a kind of historical quirk that many people in the West think of Zen as Japanese. It really arrived in Japan last. And much of what we think of as Zen is Japanese aesthetics, which are beautiful. But again, you'll see a unique expression of the Buddha Dharma. And yeah, I invite you to check it out. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining me in this Reminiscence, very different kind of episode. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks, with episodes that relate to various Dhammic topics, practices, and conversations with other teachers and practitioners. In the meantime, please, if you want to support this podcast, subscribe, review, and share. And if you find it in your heart to offer some dana, know that whatever you offer, it is gratefully accepted. Thank you, and stay well.